ago, my livid 6-year-old son came bursting in from school. He threw down a sheet of paper and a pencil, and he drew this symbol. "Mommy, what is this?" I admit I was surprised. I wasn't expecting my first grader to come home irate about long division. But I told him we use it as a tool to break numbers down into smaller groups. Still, he wasn't appeased. He demanded that I teach him everything there was to know about long division, starting right there and then. And then he stopped and he looked at me with this intensity in his face. And he said, "Mommy, don't keep things like this from me. Everything you know, you need to tell me." It is a funny story. But if you have or know a kid like mine, you're also right now nodding with a deeper understanding, because Ian wasn't being funny. In fact, he felt betrayed by me. He was so excited to learn everything the world had to offer him, and he felt, even at that tiny age, that he knew nothing, and it devastated him. Well, because of the intensity in my son, school didn't really work out for him very well. He was bored, restless, unhappy, and soon his love of learning began to wane. So after a couple of years, my family, with my younger daughter included, took a bit of a turn from the education norm. We designed what Logan LaPlante calls, in his TEDx talk on education, hack schooling. We call it hybrid education, and this is how it works. We first choose what it is that we want to study, and then we choose how we want to go about studying it. Sometimes that means using a private tutor. Sometimes that means studying at home or in the library. Sometimes using an online class, and sometimes a public school class. We put everything on the table, and then we pick and choose according to our kids' needs. Let me give you an example. We'll go back to Ian, who at the ripe old age of 2 already knew he wanted to be a professional musician. So when we developed his learning plan, we built in a lot of time for music study. Well, sometimes that meant specific activities, but a lot of times that meant giving him open-ended time for simply practicing music or listening to music. One particularly interesting year, we studied English and history at home, math and science in the public middle school, band at the public high school, music theory at the university, and percussion with a private tutor. Well, now he's graduated high school, and he just celebrated his 15th birthday last week. He's an award-winning performer and composer. He has a full-length, professionally produced album, and he's about to embark on a full-time music career. The point is, Ian, like every kid, doesn't fit into a particular mold. So we molded his education to fit him. And when you let your kids' interests drive their education, they flourish. Anyone can do this. First, what you need to do is deconstruct what it is that you know and assume about education. Then you get to reconstruct it creatively in exciting ways. But first, before we can do either of those things, we have to address our fears. Because now that he's graduated successfully, I can tell you the story of Ian's education journey with confidence. But in the beginning, when he was asking me to educate him at home, I wasn't quite as sure. In fact, for a long time, I felt unable to move forward simply because of fear. And as a result of that, he spent a couple of pretty miserable years in a traditional school environment before I was willing to take that alternative education plunge with him and his sister. There are so many insecurities that keep us from taking life by the horns. I see conflicting headlines in the media all the time telling us how we should live our lives. There's this one, 10 really important things you should do in order not to feel like you're a total loser when you're 85. These include things like writing a novel, climbing a mountain, traveling the world. But then there's this one, 10 things you're doing to make yourself feel terribly important that are actually making you a terrible parent. And these include things like writing a novel, climbing a mountain, and traveling the world. And there's a lot about helicopter parenting and how we're taking too much pride in our kids' accomplishments. And there's articles about how terrible public schools are. and how they're ruining our kids, and articles about how terrible homeschoolers are and how they're ruining their kids. There's so much shaming to be had, and it's easy to pick and choose the messages that make us feel the worst about ourselves. So I'm giving you permission to push all that aside. Because in the end, you have a child. You're the parent of a child, the teacher of a child, the grandparent, the aunt or uncle, the caregiver of a child. None of the noise matters. What matters is this child. Now, my particular experience has to do with issues surrounding giftedness. But what I've learned through that lens is that we are shortchanging children across the entire academic spectrum simply because we are not addressing their individuality. Because of my own kids, I have met so many amazing others, and I'm continually floored by their capacities for love, humor, kindness, curiosity, creativity. Our kids are crazy amazing, and they are each unique. And it is beyond time to quit treating them like they're all the same. So if you need it, I give you permission to be bold and courageous for your kids and to make their education joyful. Talk to your kids. What do they love? What do they hate? What terrifies them? What excites them? How will you introduce this young child to her world? Because that's the purpose of education. Now what? Well, for any massive, life-changing undertaking, we need a roadmap. And in this journey, we're sharing the driver's seat with our kid. So on we go, bold and courageous together. A couple of years ago, I was invited to lead a series of listening sessions for our public school district. I worked with separate groups of students, teachers, and principals from elementary through high school. And it was the coolest thing because my only job was to ask them questions to get them to visualize their ideal learning environment. And people from ages 10 to 65 had the most amazing ideas about what education could be. As we started out, I gave them permission to objectively evaluate their current education environment. I asked them to write down everything they could think of when they thought of school. It could be physical things, like pencils, tables, and chairs, or the structure of a school, like schedules, grades, and the courses that we studied, or social considerations, like how a teacher interacts with the class, or how peer relationships and friendships work. You can do this too. Just write down everything you can think of when you think of education and put it in a box without judgment, and then pull out each piece and evaluate objectively. Is this pencil something we need to keep? Or perhaps we want to use pens, or maybe laptops. Why are the core subjects what they are? Why do we study math, reading, and science over all other subjects? Maybe we want to include computer science, entrepreneurship, foreign language, self-care, interpersonal relationships, not just as electives, but as part of the core. When we evaluate each aspect of how we do school, we get invested in the things we keep, and we refine them to better meet the needs of our students. And sometimes we will realize that something we previously practiced, like maybe hour-to-hour subject changes, no longer has use. Even this process of objective analysis can be terrifying and threatening, because here's where the flawed logic of the slippery slope comes in. If everything is on the table to be assessed for its value, then what's to keep us from throwing it all out the window and dumbing down our kids? But we're smarter than that. If our education system can no longer stand up to scrutiny, if we have taken away our own permission to be critical thinkers as adults, then what chance do our children have? Well, that's the deconstruction. Now we get to create. You and your kid get to do the fun part and decide what it is that you want out of education. Why are you educating, and what do you guys want out of it? When our family created our own education vision, we used words like courage, compassion, creativity, confidence, self-respect, thoughtfulness, intelligence. These are words that we would use to describe the person we want to be when we grow up. myself included. So it makes sense that they're included in our education vision. Well, once you have your vision taken care of, you get to set some goals. Now I'm going to share some of mine. Yours might look quite similar to this, or you might have more, or fewer, or something different altogether. We'll start with the first one. We're going to make sure our kid feels empowered by co-creating an education that centers on what she's good at and what she loves. Education in our home is all about mutual respect. And when you give your kid a voice in creating her education, you validate and empower her in amazing ways. So ask her, what does she want to study? How does she want to study? Bring thoughts and ideas to the table, but if you have subject material that's not up for discussion, then you better be prepared to defend its purpose. Offer guidance, but make your plan together. I just can't talk enough about individualization. When we pulled Ian out to develop his hybrid learning environment at home, we assessed the things that worked for him and used those as ingredients to create his learning plan. Now, Ian worked best when he moved, so the first thing we got rid of when we took him home was the table and chair and worksheets. And instead, I got him a floor trampoline and a wall whiteboard, or in this case, a patio door. And that way he could do his work and talk and move around and pace while he went. And almost overnight, he went from a kid who looked at a math assignment like a death sentence to one who literally, after 4 hours of problem solving, I would have to redirect to a new activity. We're going to challenge the norm, take risks, problem solve, and get messy. We live in a world where the GPA is king. And an A, of course, implies perfection. But by limiting ourselves to attaining perfection, we don't take a lot of risks. Instead, we study what's on the test. And if we're someone who gets anxious about doing well, then we spend more time stressed out about that test. And suddenly, what we're learning becomes secondary to how we perform. But we can do better than this. When my daughter Eva was 6 years old, she was already a voracious storyteller. So that year, for her English curriculum, I decided to let her write, edit, illustrate, and self-publish her very own book. We got incredibly messy. We went to the library, we brought home a bazillion picture books and spread them out all over the floor. We explored setting, character, illustrations, narration, dialogue, and how a book was put together from its title page to the front and back cover. It was a creative process, and though there was an end result in mind, there was no right or wrong to it. And Eva was hooked. Every year after that, she produced another book, exploring short stories, novellas, even a rhyming picture book. And now that she's 12, she can produce her own book entirely without my help. She didn't learn this by taking a test. She learned this by asking questions, getting examples, and trying it out on her own, just like we do as adults. She's free to explore and master her art because she's allowed to experiment and take risks. We're going to make our education meaningful. While I was at home writing my first draft for this TEDx event, Eva was out presenting to over 300 students in a small town called Bottineau, North Dakota. She's been an author for so long that schools regularly invite her to give inspirational talks to their students. And she's done dozens of these presentations, even though she doesn't even want to be an author when she grows up anymore. She does it because she knows these kids look to her as a peer who's doing adult things. She's not waiting. She's inspiring them not only to write their own stories, but to grab onto their other loves with equal excitement, whether it's science or sports or video gaming or cooking. And by connecting her learning to real life, she's not only inspiring these kids, she's also connecting more meaningfully to her education. We're going to include practical life skills. Now, most of these you already know. Fixing a broken window, cooking a healthy meal, taking care of your personal finances. But this list evolves with the times, and like everything else, it's unique to each student. For Ian, who wants to be a musician, he also needs social media management, website development, and business skills, in addition to his home and life skills. We're going to prioritize our physical and emotional health. We're going to take care of our bodies, even though exercise can come as a challenge for our family. We're also going to take care of our emotional well-being, both self-care and interpersonal relationships. And here's the key. If our well-being is out of balance, everything else waits. And finally, we're going to evaluate and evolve, and if something isn't working, we're going to change it. At least twice a semester, the kids and I sit down and assess how things are going. Do we have enough active learning time, creative time, downtime? Does our hybrid cocktail mix seem to be working, or do we need to shift it and balance it? And we do. We make small changes and large changes constantly to get the balance right. Education is like cooking up a big pot of stew. You add a little, you taste, you add a little, and you taste again. The best part about all of this is that we don't have to fit in the things we love once school is over, because the things we love become school itself. When Eva was producing her books, she was doing it as part of school. When she was preparing her presentations, she was doing it as part of school. And when Ian was practicing and writing new pieces, he did it as part of his normal school day. And even the last 2 years, when he's been full-time enrolled in public school, we've still been able to commit over 50% of his coursework to music study. And now that he's graduated, he's about to spend the next 3 gap years before college, if he chooses to go to college, to study and pursue a full-time career in music. We don't see these things as extra. We see this as their education. We don't shy away from great literature or the wonders of mathematics. We're simply broadening our scope to include more things in our education that we might find meaningful. So, by the power I give myself as a fellow human being and a lover of children and educators, I give students, teachers, principals, parents, and caregivers everywhere permission to dream your dreams of education. Why do you educate? What is your ideal vision? Dream it. And instead of being paralyzed by your own personal GPA, take risks. Get messy and problem solve, and let's make it happen. Let's remove the fear of each other and of ideas we find threatening and make something new and messy and beautiful together. Thank you.